So, Croeso nôl, welcome back. Today it is Nicole who gets a coffee shout out, so thank you so much, Nicole, for your generous donation. It really means a lot, especially at this time of year when things are a little bit tight. So thank you very much indeed to you, and of course to everyone else who is supporting the channel in whatever way you feel you can. It's super cool of you all to be here. Christmas is over, which means that it is now time to get ready for New Year's Eve, and in Wales we have a very special and suddenly very famous way to celebrate the new year. Why it's become famous this year all of a sudden, I don't really know. I guess it's just our time to have a famous thing on the internet, so it's time for us to talk about Mari Lwyd. And Mari Lwyd is Grey Mari in Welsh. Some people say that it means grey mare, other people disagree that that's the etymology of it. Either way, Mari is a name, so my horse skull wassailing costume is now called Mari. Mari. If you've never heard of the Mari Lwyd, it's time for a little introduction, because the Mari Lwyd is a wonderful tradition in Wales, specifically in Morgannwg, down in South Wales, which is not where I'm from. I'm from Bangor in the north. And that means that I'd never actually heard of the Mari Lwyd before I was about 21, when I met somebody from Morgannwg and they told me all about how they dressed up as a skeletal horse for New Year's Eve. I was intrigued. So it turns out that the Mari Lwyd isn't really written about before 1800. 1800 is the first time we have Mari Lwyd written down as a thing, a named tradition in Wales. And this comes from somebody's diary, effectively a travel-log of his trip around Wales that he took in the 1790s, where he saw this Mari Lwyd being used. And Mari Lwyd is a hobby horse. It's a giant horse costume that you get into to celebrate a certain festival. And hobby horse traditions actually have a very long and widespread history. You find them all over Europe. In Spain and Italy and the south of France, they tend to use them at carnival time, so at the start of Lent, before Easter. And in Northern Europe, they tend to have a bit of a wider spread. So some people use them for midsummer, some people use them as a springtime festival tradition, so around the carnival time of year. So if you want to go down to Mons in Belgium, you will see an incredible hobby horse tradition where they have the hunting of the dragon, the Mons dragon, where somebody dresses as St. George, the famous Armenian saint. They chase a dragon around town and then they shoot the dragon with a gun. It's amazing. So if you want to have a go at making a Mari Lwyd, that's basically what this video is all about. And in Britain and Ireland and the Isle of Man, we tend to use them as a winter festival. And it can be either midwinter at the solstice, or at Christmas, or at All Souls Day, so Halloween, or at New Year's Eve. And in Wales, in Morgannwg, it seems to be the modern tradition is for it to be a New Year's Eve festival thing. Activity. Let's use the word activity instead of thing. It's a New Year's Eve activity. So that is why I'm doing this video between Christmas and New Year's Eve. A lot of places on the internet have been talking about Mari this year as a Christmas tradition, and I don't know why she's famous this year all of a sudden on the internet. I'm really pleased that she is, it's great, but I don't know why. Yes, it can be a Christmas tradition, and you can dress up as Mari for Christmas, but from what I can tell, there's a much wider spread. In Ireland, the Larvan, and in the Isle of Man, the Larvana is used in winter celebrations. So from what I can tell, you can adapt this tradition to kind of whenever you want. If it suits you and your community to get Mari out for the summer solstice, or for a springtime festival, or for a neo-pagan festival that you think it would be suitable for, then that seems to be something that you can just do. And who the heck am I to tell you otherwise? Does this have some kind of a link to pagan, pre-Christian European tradition? Possibly, we don't know. Some of the earliest evidence for hobby horse activity is in the high medieval period, so around the 13th century, where people were dressing as hobby horses for feasts and festivals. And in the 16th and 17th century, they become really, really popular, and especially when they're associated with things like Morris dancing in England, where we do have some hobby horses, like the Old Hoss tradition. Down in Cornwall, there is the pen glass, which means grey head. It's a skull, almost exactly the same as Mari Lwyd, or blue head, or green head. Celtic languages, they can be weird. I'll do a video on them, don't worry. So, I'm going to take a sip of tea. Horse today. I'm horse. Oh. So, how do you make a Mari Lwyd, or a pen glass, or a larvan? Well, what you need first is a horse's head. And it doesn't need to be a real horse's head. Don't worry about that. If you don't happen to have a horse's skull lying around your house, you can just use a sheet. In fact, the two historical Maris that we have in the Welsh National Museum are made from sheets. You can just use a cotton sheeting or a wool sheet, which probably would have been more common pre-19th century. You sew up one seam, so you make it into a cone shape, and once you have your cone, you then stuff the cone with hay, or with straw, or with dry grass, or with old clothes, or whatever you want to get the shape solid, and then you've basically got your horse's head. You can then stick a couple of little ears on the top if you want, if you have some material. You draw some eyes on the side of the head. You can draw a little smiley mouth. You decorate the sheet with ribbons. You get underneath it with a stick, which you then use to hold the head above you, which turns you into a giant horse instead of just a normal human-sized horse. And we've got some amazing photos from the late 19th and early 20th century of people in Wales doing Mari Lwyding, where they have fitted a bridle to the Mari and there's somebody guiding them around. Because, of course, you can't cut holes in your sheet. That would ruin the illusion. So these people are blindly walking around villages dressed as a giant skeletal horse being guided around by their mates, and they are guaranteed all drunk. Because this is a wassailing tradition. Wassailing is basically trick-or-treating. You go around the houses in your village asking people for snacks, and in Wales, with Mari Lwyd, that involves a proto-rap battle. Yes, we invented everything. So what you have to do is called Pwnco, or Pwnco, and Pwnco involves Mari Lwyd presenting some rhyming couplets to the homeowner. The homeowner then has to respond in kind, and Mari is trying to gain access to the house, and the homeowner is trying to prevent Mari from entering the house. So, if you can't think up enough rhymes about why Mari Lwyd shouldn't be allowed in your house, you have to let her and her companions in and let them have as much beer and snacks as they like. In reality, it was probably you go in, you do a couple of verses, everybody has a little laugh over Grandad stumbling over his rhyming, and then Mum and Dad come out with some beers and some snacks and some cakes, and everybody has a great time. So, it's developed this kind of sinister, a skeleton horse comes to your door and demands everything from your larder. But remember that this is a festival tradition. This is a community festival. If you're part of a village and you're not living under COVID restrictions, it's a wonderful thing to do to see somebody trot up to your house dressed as a big horse covered in ribbons. It's a laugh, everybody has a few drinks, and everyone goes away happy and welcomes the new year, visiting their family and doing something memorable. It's a nice way to end the year. So, obviously, I'm making my own Mari Lwyd, and I've decided that I am not doing this by halves, because I feel a duty, now that I live outside Wales, to really... I bought a horse's skull. Happy New Year! So this is Mari. This is my Mari Lwyd skull, and this is actually the skull of a Shetland pony, which died a natural death of old age after a long life of working. It has some issues, has some little age-related problems, poor thing. But the main thing that I want to do with this skull is be completely uninvasive. So everything that I'm doing to make this Mari Lwyd, I want to be able to take away from this skull and leave just a pristine skull. So her ears have already been made, and the fun thing about skulls is that they are pretty good for sticking things onto, because that is what skulls are for. Skulls are there to keep your brain in and to keep your skin on. So her ears just slot nicely in here. In terms of keeping the jaw and the skull together, that is achieved with some string. So we have some string at the back of the jaw, and it works, as you can see. holds her together quite nicely. And it allows some movement, some articulation of the jaw, which is kind of cool. Then for the sheet, I'm just going to tie the sheet to the string at the back. We've got some string at the back here. I'm going to tie the sheet to the string, and then I'm going to get under the sheet. And that's Mari complete. So this is going to form a fun little New Year's Eve costume for me. Let's go make it. Some of the first things you're going to need to do when you're making your Mari Lwyd are preparing your sheet and attaching the sheet to the skull. It's worth trying a couple of different experimental ways of doing this, because there isn't really an instruction book online for how to make a Mari Lwyd. So I decided that what I was going to do was lash the sheet as best I could to the stick at the back of the skull and to the strings at the back of the skull, and then I would work the string through any of the holes at the back of the skull to keep it anchored in place. This took a couple of efforts because the first couple of times I tried to do this, the sheet fell off, and at one point the skull fell off the stick. If the skull falls off the stick, it can cause some serious damage, so be careful. We were very close to losing some of Mari's teeth. Also, please don't put your craft knife in your mouth like I'm doing here. Obviously take care and be sensible. Lash as much string as you need to this sheet, and please make sure to double and triple check that Mari is secure. There are a lot of things that can fall off here. Skulls are heavy, and if you're holding this 2 feet above your head on a stick and you get caught in a gust of wind, there's the potential that it will take both you and Mari with it, and you will have some kind of horrendous skeletal horse accident that nobody wants to see, but if you film it, someone would probably buy from you. I don't know why I'm stuffing sheets into her mouth at this point, but I must have decided it was a good idea at some point in the procedure. Oh, also, remember, you need to have the sheet in front of you, otherwise it ruins the illusion, so don't forget to sew the open edges of the sheet at the back of the skull, okay? Not at the front. I decided her ears needed a little more security, so I sewed 2 loops just using my normal linen thread into the ears, and then where they rest is on 2 pieces of bone that project just above the top of the skull. You can see it just there. That is the top of the jawbone, and it's really conveniently positioned to hold in these little felt ears. So 2 loops knotted at the back helps to hold those ears in nice and securely, and that just prevents them falling out or getting blown away as easily as they would if they didn't have the loops on them. And there we go. Perfect. So finishing touches include cutting the label off your sheet, if you forgot to do that already, and then making Mari's mane. There doesn't seem to be a traditional way of making this, but a lot of the more popular and famous pictures of Mari that I've seen tend to show her with a lovely mane made out of ribbons, so I decided that I was going to jump on that bandwagon, because why not, and make her a lovely mane. These ribbons are red and green because it's festive and because they are 2 of the colours of the Welsh flag, so with the red, the white and the green we've got a lovely Welsh looking Mari. These are made from crepe paper. We happen to have a load of these crepe paper ribbons lying around from a Christmas gift that we got from a friend, so thanks very much for that, Chelsea. We now have a lovely set of ribbons for Mari Lwyd's mane, and I'm just sewing these in with a couple of running stitches using my linen thread, using quite a thick needle, almost a tapestry needle for this. There are a lot of layers involved in this, so do use a strong needle and use a thimble for goodness sake. Abby Cox is going to come at me for this, I know it. I folded the ends of these ribbons over a few times just to give them some extra strength, because crepe paper's pretty flimsy stuff, but if you fold it over half a dozen times it produces quite a nice, thick, chunky fabric for you to sew through, so hopefully these guys won't get torn out the first time we use it in anger. I mean in joy. Why would I be angry? I'm wearing a horse's skull. Brilliant. Now remember, don't sew too far down the back of the sheet, otherwise you will struggle to get into it, you will struggle to walk in it, and you will struggle to get out of it. You're making a sheet cape type situation here, not a hobble skirt. So don't sew all the way down the back of the sheet. In fact, don't sew very far down the back of the sheet at all if you can help it. If you find that you've got a load of sheet that you need to stuff into the skull, I recommend that you run a cord or a thread through the top hem of the sheets, and then you can concertina all the fabric together and shove it into the back here. It also helps to secure it against the stick if you eventually insert the stick in underneath this sheet. It gives you a nice, firm, solid thing to attach the stick to. So using that cord to run through it really did help to secure all of the fabric and the ribbons to the skull. Then you can lash the whole affair together. Just lash it up with as much string as you can. If you're using wires, strings, gaffer tape, use as much as you can. This thing has to be really securely attached to the stick that you've just inserted in the back of the skull, okay? I cannot emphasize enough how strongly and securely you need this guy to be secured. You have to secure it all together really, really tightly and really, really securely, using as many points of contact as possible. Okay, let's give her a whirl. So there you go, that's Mari Lwyd. If you have any New Year's Eve traditions in your community or any kind of hobby horse traditions in your community, please do let me know in the comments. I'd love to find out more about how this tradition exists in other parts of the world, because it's a fascinating idea. You dress up as a giant horse and romp around town asking for snacks. It's an incredible idea. So please do let me know if you or anyone you know has a wassailing hobby horse tradition around where you live. And that's it. So if I don't see you before, have a great new year. Like I said, I will be wearing this costume on New Year's Eve in Edinburgh, keeping my distance very, very carefully. I will be wearing a mask underneath my Mari Lwyd costume. So if you happen to see me, give me a shout. And yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn unwaith eto am ymuno. Thank you so much once again for joining, and I will chi tro nesa. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now. Hey, thanks for, like, letting me wear you. Yeah, I made it.